Good evening. We greet you tonight in the name of all that is good, all that is holy, and all that is sacred, and in the warm and loving energy of this ministry, Spiritual Life Center. If you're with us for the very first time tonight, or if you're live streaming for the very first time, we especially want to welcome you because we know that you are not here by accident. We know that every one of us is here by divine appointment. And we're very excited about our program tonight. I'd like to introduce Mary O'Brien, and she is one of our chaplains, and she's going to lead us in our opening prayer.
Thank you. Dear Father, Mother God, we are gathered here on a Wow Wednesday night to share food and fellowship and to have an interesting program tonight, and we are all here as the SLC church family. We thank you for our blessed church and our blessed church family. We know that we are here to be spiritually fed, and then we take it out into the community and use it in our daily lives. We know that we are getting good messages tonight, whether it's Christian or whether it's interfaith. We are all here as God's children, and it is good and very good. And so we thank you, God, and we are very grateful. We are enjoying this beautiful weather, and we know you are sending us our good each and every day. And so it is.
Amen. Thank you, Mary. I know that there's probably one or two people in the room who have a cell phone. I'd appreciate it if you would silence them. The chaplains have their healing circle in the annex right next door, right after this service, so you can just continue the good vibes that I know we're going to have and go right over there afterwards and let them do their magic with you. Next week, how many people were here for the autumnal shamanic smudging ceremony that Jenny Thomas did? How many did any come? Well, we're going to have a vernal equinox smudging ceremony next week. Then we're going to have the mother drum again, and so come join us while she helps us go into spring all cleansed and renewed. And Paula will again she'll be here with the mother drum. And then, if you're feeling called to be a prayer chaplain, I don't know if any of you have had that, wondered what it's like to be a chaplain or feel like it might be something you want to do. There are some information or orientation classes, well, they're actually little meetings that you can go to find out more about it, and then you can find out what the actual training is about. And so the orientations there's one on March 29th between the services, there's one on April 5th after the 11 o'clock service, and there's another one on Wednesday, April 8th at 6:15. And this will all be in bulletins, and you can find this information online. So if you are thinking that you might want to become a prayer chaplain, because that is such a great service to this community, check it out, and or talk to a chaplain. Talk to your nearest chaplain. They can also give you lots of information about their experience. So, all right. Our guest tonight is an ordained Unity minister, a licensed Unity teacher. He was senior minister at Unity Richmond East Bay for 5 years. He has a BA in psychology, a Master of Science in clinical psychology. He's a longtime Buddhist. He's been a religious science practitioner. He was on the board of the Unity West Central Region. He's a former board member of the Interfaith Council of Greater Sacramento, and I think we're going to find out even more about him. Would you please welcome Reverend Tony Jackson?
Hello.
Welcome to the the platform.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming out. I hope it's interesting.
Bring that mic up a little bit. Thank you. The people out in TV land
Oh,
can't
yes.
hear us as well. So Tony, that's a long list of stuff, and I'm guessing that you didn't start out with the intention in your life of becoming all of those things. So did you grow up in a spiritual environment? Were you taught a religion?
Yeah.
What was that?
Well, at first, I'd like to say I wanted to be a fireman. So,
Well, being a minister is a little bit like being never mind.
yeah, I mean, I literally grew up interfaith. My mother died when I was 2 years old, and so for a while there, I was raised by both grandmothers. So my paternal grandmother was Catholic. I mean, my maternal grandmother was Catholic, and my paternal grandmother she was Baptist, but then she turned Jehovah's Witness. So I had my fair share of guilt and shame growing up.
Well, you know, you get it over early in life, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So, so did your father remarry, and did you end up with that kind of?
Yeah, he did.
Where did that
when
take
I was
you?
5 years old, yeah, he remarried. Yeah.
Did you
Yeah.
live with them and did
Yeah,
that?
I was the middle of three natural brothers. There was me and an older and a younger. And so being the middle, how many people are a middle child? You know what that's like, right? You got to be the responsible one. You got to be the leader. So, you know, that was my life growing up. But then again, we had this blended family because she had 5 kids. Yeah.
So you became a family of 8 children.
We were the Brady Bunch without all the good stuff. And I can look back on that now and laugh. So that was. Yeah.
But that took you out of being in the middle, didn't it?
It did. I was still somewhere in the middle. I think I had 2 below me, but the rest of them were about my age or more. So, yeah, it did. Yeah.
So did you still have the influence from the grandparents, or did going into this move you away from those kinds of influences?
I did, but to a lesser and lesser extent. We moved away from them. And actually, the truth of it is that my stepmother she had a bit of mental illness. And so there was a lot of abuses going on. And so we didn't really have we had kind of a back and forth. Some of our childhood was good and some of it wasn't so good. But, you know, the thing about it is when you look back on things, it's always a different perspective, right? So when I was looking back on things now, is from a mature point of view. But growing up, it was, you know, a lot of, you know, secretive stuff. And so now we can look back on it and, you know, have compassion, you know. But at the time when you don't understand what's going on, you know, then you really don't understand. So it's,
Yeah, those are a lot of really big changes.
right.
Especially at such a young age.
Mm-hmm.
So was the life really relatively stable? I mean, you lived in mostly one place, or did you move around a lot?
We actually grew up very poor, and my dad took my mom's death very hard, and so he did a lot of drinking, and he was a good provider, but it just was. I would say a lack consciousness. Looking back on it, I could say there was a lot of lack consciousness. And so we actually, we lived in Sacramento most of the time, but we actually, in the summertime, we took off and we worked with the migrant workers in the fields picking fruit. And so we were, you know, even though we had, I'd say most of the time we had enough, there were times when we really didn't, you know. I can remember going to school and, you know, my hands were shaking from really not having enough nutrition. And so I've always had this compassion for people that didn't have enough, you know. I think it's because that I went through this. And I think, looking back on it, maybe it was, unconsciously something that led me to the path that I'm on now.
So as you went through high school and, beyond high school, what path did you take? If you, obviously it led you to this, but did you leave home early, or did you, to get yourself out of it?
Yeah.
What was your process?
Oh, I ran. I remember as a young child, the Latin scared me with the Catholics. And so I would just do anything to get out of that, just get out of the, and back then, there was no socializing, so it seemed very oppressive to me. And then later on, we spent less time with the maternal family and more time with the paternal family. And so the Jehovah's Witness, I think as a Catholic, I think I was baptized like within 3 months. They want to save your soul in case something happens, and God forbid you die, right? So then on the, eventually I became, I think as a young teenager, I think I was like 13, got baptized into the Jehovah's Witness. And for me, it was just spirituality. It was just like I needed to have that connection with spirit, because I felt I needed support because of the way I grew up. I always felt like I needed to have something beyond, what was in this world. But when I turned 17, my first opportunity to get out of the house, I went in the service, and I never looked back. But I remember when I went into signed up for the service, and the Jehovah's Witness found out about it, and because I was baptized, they sent a whole herd of elders out to try and convince me not to. And I think at the time I said something like, well, if all of us were like you, I guess we would be defenseless, right? Something like that,
Only a 17-year-old would.
Right, exactly. But I think the bigger picture on that was my soul was rejecting it. I really didn't need what it had to offer anymore. And then I started seeing a greater truth. And so to continue the spirituality path, when I got into the service, I continued to look for something more. And I always had this God outside of me type thing. So I was always praying to this God. It wasn't just praying, it was foxhole prayer, a begging, a beseeching, making deals. But it wasn't working for me. So eventually I came across, I had a real brief stint with, what's it called? Tom Cruise, the Scientology. And that was very scary. It was like 3 weeks, and it felt like it was 3 months, And I got out of that, and so then I went into Buddhism after that. Religious science and Buddhism.
So you're a born seeker then. It sounds like there's always, on some level, you've always felt some sort of connection, and you really were finding the way that worked for you. It doesn't sound like this was like a new thing. It was like you were always sort of going towards that. Does that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I never really wanted to be a minister. My first Unity church was Christ Unity with Phil and Dorothy. I don't know how many of you go back that far.
How many go back that far?
Yeah. And so when I walked in, I knew that was it for me, because I was in religious science at the time, and it was more science it was principled, but it didn't have the heart that I needed with Unity. And even though they had the same theology, that it wasn't delivered in the same way, but I was still a Buddhist. So at one time I was doing all three. And I thought, well, I've got to pick. I don't have time. And so eventually I did, but I'm still a Buddhist at heart, you know, and the religious science, I mean, it's all blended in. So when I walked into Christ Unity, and I could feel it, you know, and at the time, you know, I wasn't a crier, you know, because my dad taught us, hey, guys don't cry, you know. If you do, you know, find a secret place. You know, so I didn't, so, but when I walked into Christ Unity, it was like, the story changed, you know. And Phil and Dorothy were doing The Best Is Yet to Be, and Dorothy, you know, she was one of my faves, and she's quite a character.
Let's rewind just a little bit. So you went into the service, and is that when you found Buddhism, was while you were in the service?
Yeah.
And then, how long were you in the service?
4 years.
4 years?
Yeah.
Okay. And then after you came out, obviously you started with religious science, or did you do all of that while you were still in the service?
Religious science.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was doing. I think I had discovered religious science before Buddhism, and but they both had something to offer. You know, religious science and unity are principled, and Buddhism takes you to that place of emptiness. You know, meditating and the type of Buddhism that I practiced was they used a practice called Tritaka, which is basically you meditate with your eyes open and you gaze into a candle facing the east. And it empties your mind, but it's also good for the internal organs. And so it also, what it did for me was it taught me to actually meditate while in a waking state, you know. And that's mostly what I do all day is I'm in a meditative state even while I'm not in a meditative state, even while I'm in a waking state. So sometimes it's difficult to explain, but it just becomes a habit. I guess it becomes part of who you are after a while. But when I got into unity, they have a different type of meditation. It's called the silence. And it's not like we do here on Sunday, but the silence really is an unconscious state. And so the first time I went to the vestibule at Silent Unity, you have to be in there on the hour, on the half hour, and you have to come out exactly on the half hour to the second or on the half hour. And so I set my intention for my meditation. I think I was graduating from licensed teacher school. And when I set my meditation, it seems like I was in there for about 30 seconds. And I was out into the silence. And when I looked back up, it was like 5 seconds to go. And I was completely conscious again. And so I walked out of there and I thought, well, that's a little odd. But then nothing happened. But then later on, as the days went on, because I was there 2 weeks at a time, it was just so different. It was like things were happening all around me. You know, I got convinced by a couple of friends, and both of these women were gamblers, and I was not a gambler. But what happened was we went to the riverboat, which is the only way you could gamble in Missouri. So we went to Harrah's. We started playing these slot machines. And I remember I thought, well, this is going to take a lot of pennies because they like the pennies. But then they had the long, you know, cards. And so we were playing those, and it just went on and on, you know, the celebration, you know, the noise, the whistles, the bells. And so we'd win like $100 and $50 or whatever. And so it happened again, like about a half hour through the night. And I thought, well, just hold my spot. So when I came out of the restroom, it was up to like $8,000. And it was just, and the day before that, I had just totally released into some strange ritual of just crying. So it was like ups and downs when I went back to the village. It was always something different. But at that point in time, when I came back, it was like I won all this money, and then I came back, and within 2 or 3 days, the wife and I agreed to a divorce. And so all of these changes were happening all at once. Unplanned things were happening. And it was because of these moments in the silence. And so what I do now is I just take a Michael Hopi tape, and sometimes I'll just put it in a tape, and I'll just listen to it. And going into the silence now, I don't need any aid. I can do it, without that. But that's how I practice now.
So let's back up again, and so you were going to Christ Unity. Something brought you to start studying to be a licensed Unity teacher. Was that like a very conscious decision, or was it something that you just sort of kind of got pulled into little by little, the way God reels you in?
Yeah, I blame that one completely on Spiritual Life Center. I was a chaplain here for 6 years. How many people remember when I was a chaplain here? Yeah. And so I just kind of felt the need to serve. And then I wasn't really, I guess I wasn't that good at, doing the procedure to go to school and everything. And then Michael was my mentor, and he really didn't know much about it either, so we finally figured it out. And so I think I enjoyed teaching. I taught here for a few years. Was it a few years? Yeah, Claire, was it a few years? Yeah. Yeah, so I enjoyed it. Yeah, and then I did some platforming, and I'd always say that I came from, when I first came into Christ Unity, I was way at the back. It's a big church. And I don't know who it was, but the only person I would talk to was a doorman going out, because I was very shy. And then I got a little closer and a little closer. And then when I was a licensed teacher, I was up here a little bit, but still nervous. I remember the first time I was platforming, I was like shaking, It's like, and I thought, well, what am I afraid of? I wasn't really afraid, I was just shaking, So, yeah, that to answer your question, I think I felt like I needed to do that, yeah.
But it sounds like it was gradual. It wasn't one of those lightning strikes to say, you will be a licensed Unity teacher. And then I understand that you became a Unity minister by doing the field program as opposed to going through the whole seminary. Is that?
Oh, no.
How did that come about?
No, I actually went to Unity Urban School, and so that they require 1,000 hours of seminary, and so I went that program. I thought about the field license program, but it really doesn't give you much, in the way of seminary, And so, it's a 4-year program. So while I was going to Richmond, I was actually going through that program, and it was a combination of online school and going back there. And so their headquarters was in Detroit, but it was also sponsored by Unity Worldwide, so I had to go to the village too. And I actually enjoyed that a lot. I think that transformed my life, especially the self-awareness classes, which is basically, I was surprised how easily that I could lose my ego with the self-awareness classes. So I enjoyed it, yeah. But like I was telling George earlier, I actually kind of went into the whole Unity ministry thing backwards, because I was resisting it, and every time I would resist, as people often say no to spirit, and you end up being, it's not a punishment, but you end up being shown why that was not a good decision, right? And so I had a lot of lessons to learn. And so it's like when I accepted the job at Unity Richmond, I said no a couple of times. Joe Sloan, the regional rep for the West Central region, asked me, and there was a lot of problems over there. And so I finally did say yes, and I can honestly say that nothing matures you spiritually more than being a senior minister at a Unity church. It's transforming more than any seminary that could actually, because you're putting it's real life. You're putting yourself in. It's not about theory. It's not about anything but you being present, with actually avatars. They're speaking to you and telling, reflecting to you. So it's real life, one-on-one, living. It's living. It's not a third person experience.
Right. And we had a brief moment conversation. I think it was the day you spoke here a while ago. But I don't know any minister who will sit there and say, oh yeah, I woke up one day and I was just thrilled at the idea of going and becoming a minister. It's like we all said no and no and no and no. And then it's not a choice. It turns out that it's not a choice.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, on some level, it's just not a choice. Right?
Yeah. It really ultimately when you finally, realize that it's not that you're predestined to do it,
Right.
but because we have so many different abilities that we could actually become, spiritually expressive. There's so many different ways we can do that in life, but there is a propensity, as James says, in your spiritual DNA, that actually can put forth it to your highest and best. And so when you come to that point, you know it. And I remember the time that I knew it, as I said, I got just so much feedback, and there was nobody there. But I just got this feedback. And I realized that life is about grace. It's about finding your grace, It's not about, it's one day I realized that we're not human doers, we're human beings. So it's about being. And only you know how to do that the best. And so one day I realized that, and I thought, this is it. This is, like it or not, so to speak.
Yeah, because it's sort of like you just standing there and, it's right in front of you. It's like, there it is. I remember when Reverend James, I was invited in, I thought it was to talk about a meeting they were going to have about Wednesday nights because Reverend Dave was resigning, or he was retiring. And so they said, we're having a meeting on Sunday, we'd like to talk to you. So I go in on a Friday or Thursday and talk to them, and I thought it was about helping at the meeting, and it was about me taking on the program. Mm-hmm. I have no idea why. I sat there and I listened, and they said, it's going to be hard, and these are all the things that are going to happen, and it's going to be hard. And, oh, yes, and it's going to be hard, and, oh, yes, and we can't pay you. And I sat there and I went, and then I said yes. And that's 4 years ago, by the way. Next week, WOW is 4 years old. But if to this day, I have no idea what was happening when this mouth said yes.
Yeah.
Because my brain was not, right?
Yeah, how does that happen?
I don't know. I thought maybe we could figure that out. But it does. I mean, and it just seemed like the most natural thing to do. And then, of course, I had absolutely no clue how to even start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. That's a good story. I like it.
And then it was just like putting one foot in front of the other. But it really is like you just keep going, and all of a sudden one day, whatever it is just in front of you, like the ministry or like your next step or, And I mean, I don't know what you're doing now. You were in Richmond for 5 years, and you came up for air.
Yeah, I felt like my mission was completed, I felt like, the Moses that led the Israelites through the wilderness for 40 years, and now it's Aaron's turn, past the wand, and now he takes them to the promised land, you know. But it really did feel like that. I had lots of clues. When I first got to Richmond, it took them a while to warm up to me, but after they did, it was, we became quite close and, you know, attached. So it was difficult to let go of that ministry. And it's very odd, you know, when I first got there was a lot of problems and a lot of, you know, illegal stuff. But when I feel good that I left it in a high place, and the real challenge with being a senior minister is leading by faith. You know, you are called to your faith is tested. To give you an example, one day we had a flood in the basement, and the sump pump wasn't working, and it flooded out all the mechanical equipment, which was from the 40s or 50s, or that building they owned, but it was very old. And so, to top it off, the insurance lapsed because they didn't get the payment. Something happened with the payment, so they didn't get it. So the timing was perfect for the perfect storm, and so the board was panicking, and I says, okay, now I've got to be the spiritual leader. So, you know, fortunately, I was pretty good at it. So then what I did is we called the meeting, and I said, the first thing we got to do is we have to not panic, we got to pray. And I said, you know, and I gave them the story about the farmer, you know, and how the horse ran off, and, you know, the kid broke his leg, and won't go into that. But we, well, the long and short of it was that, you know, through a series of phone calls and prayers and that type of thing, and affirmative visioning, that the insurance said, yes, we will, you know, we will cover this. You know, they decided they were going to honor it, and so we said, that's great, and what about the $5,000 deductible, you know, and so I being a contractor, then I made a deal with the guy, the mechanical contractor, and, you know, ended up being covered under his fee, and so that worked out good. And then we ended up come to find out that mechanical equipment would have had to been replaced within a year anyways, because it was so old, and that would have cost the church, you know, $30,000, $40,000 that we didn't have. So as it turned out, it was just like the farmer story, you know, where the thing that seemingly happened for a bad reason turned out to be, you know, a positive thing. And so that's just one of the many, many things that happened there that was, you know, real life, you know, being in the moment and just going with the flow. And, you know, as I said, there's no script for that. When in life, it's just there. And so you just step forward and you do what you have to do.
Yeah, I mean, just whatever's right in front of you right now.
Yeah.
Which is why we talk so much about, you know, staying present, and that's such a trigger for people. It's like, how do I stay present? It's like, just pay attention to what's in front of you.
Yeah.
You know, don't go make it hard. Just look what's in front of you and see that's what there is to do right now.
Yeah.
But when you're really, it's like you're at the head of this group of people who are looking to you for all this guidance.
Yeah.
That's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you're fogging a mirror, I mean, you're going to have challenges with your own, mostly with your own self. But I always say, you know, when the me has left the room, there's God. If you can take yourself out of it, the small self, that Jesus said to deny self, then what you're left with is your God essence. And so if you're comfortable with that, and one day we all will all be, like it or not, we become that which we seek. Whatever that is, that, you know, however you want to look at that. And so that's the way you become comfortable, is to let that part of you go. You know, then it's not about you looking at yourself, you know, as a third person, as a critic, you know. You let go of the critical thinking and you just start being, you know. You start being, and then the moment comes up where, wow.
You know, Deepak Chopra says that being able to live with ambiguity is a sign of spiritual maturity. Do you think that the circumstances of your childhood and growing up helped you learn to be comfortable in ambiguity at an early age so that you have, and take that into your adulthood and into your ministry? Is that possible?
Yeah, I became very comfortable with it, I think, in early adolescence. At first, it was just pure anger. It was pure anger. I didn't understand what the big thing about Mother's Day was, But fortunately, I had grandmothers that taught me what that was about. And so I became very comfortable with being brave, being strong, that type of thing. And I found reward in it. And so it taught me that being uncertain, I was very comfortable with it. I would say probably too uncomfortable with where I probably kind of threw caution to the wind a couple times when I shouldn't have. But no, I never had a problem with being in an uncertain place or not knowing the direction that I was going. And I think that is as much as I disagree with the faith that I grew up in, it did give me the foundation, because whether you're worshiping in a mosque or a church, or a synagogue, wherever when you're in connection with that place, we all do it the same way. It's the same thing in your heart when you feel it inside. It doesn't matter where you're at or what your religion is. That connection that you have, that's the same. It's the same thing. And so for me, it became the foundation of faith. And so I never had a problem with ambiguity or uncertainty. I thrived on it, I would say, yeah.
And some people are really good at that, and some people just, it freaks them out. So I guess that you were well equipped in ways that you probably didn't even realize.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the middle child thing.
And then you got the youngest child who's just so used to being on their own that whatever.
The youngest child was that's the baby, and the oldest child is spoiled, right?
Well, in my family, the oldest child was the most responsible one. The middle child was the boy, so he was simply special because he was a boy.
Yeah.
And then I was the youngest, and all kinds of stuff had happened. My mother was sick when I was born. My brother was sick when I was born, and so I had a great deal of, I think, some sort of my own sort of freedom that I was born into.
Yeah.
I had to, because they left me alone more than the other two.
Mm-hmm.
Which was not they didn't abandon me, but I had more, I don't know, mental freedom, I think. I was also a baby boomer, and so we were already telling everybody to, take a hike anyway, right?
Yeah.
But so somewhere in there, where did you go get your degrees in psychology?
Just recently.
Oh, okay, so that's...
That was on my bucket list.
Okay, so you're...
Yeah. Yeah, at one point I was doing seminary, working full-time, and doing my graduate work, yeah.
And you sleep when?
And Christina says, where do you get this time to do that?
But you know what, when
it
you're
was
doing that
difficult.
sort of thing, it just happens.
And for me, it was self-efficacy. I mean, I did not have the confidence because growing up, the way I did, I've always felt like I was coming from behind. I mean, it's ironic that I ended up in Richmond because growing up, my biological mother was half Portuguese, and so her skin was a little darker than my stepmother's. And so because of that, me and my two natural brothers were separated from her kids, and so it was a racism thing going on. So I can understand when I went to Richmond, I completely identify with what was going on, with a lot of people.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for Reverend Tony? Really, they're all this shy. Oh, Tom.
Tom's not shy.
No. You mentioned you don't believe in predestination, but you have these guides operating on you throughout your life, moving you in directions. Mm-hmm. So how much free will is there?
I think that that life is completely. I mean, we're not conditioned, like Pavlov's dogs or anything like that. We have the ability to choose whatever we want to do. There's nothing outside of us, this grand master plan. But at the same time, we are the other side of the coin. One side is tails, which is our human side, and the other side of the coin that we can't see because we're facing the other way is the God side of us. And so there is that part of us that knows what's for our highest and best good. And so that part of our has a pattern for our highest and best good. And when we get out of alignment with that, it goes, right back into the groove that keeps us in alignment with our highest and best good. But we also have other paths that we could do, parallel paths, if you would, that we could do that are in congruence with our spiritual DNA, as James says. So I don't believe that there is a predestination. I do believe that we set ourselves up for it unconsciously. We set ourselves up for those synchronistic meetings and those events that change our life forever, the fork in the road type of events, where this happens in our life. But it's not coming from a grand design. The grand design is that you live fully and freely the full expression of who you are.
Other questions? Donna, Patty, Donna up here.
I was hoping you'd tell us a little bit about.
No, Donna, people in live streaming can't hear
Okay,
you.
sorry. I was hoping you could tell us about your beautiful wife and
She is
how
my
you
beautiful
met.
wife.
Yes.
Christina, take a bow. She was the former first lady. They called her at Unity of Richmond, and she's my biggest fan. And I can say Christina taught me how to love fully. She really did, because I've always had that hesitancy, the trust, the abandonment kind of thing, and she helped me perfect that. Unity helped me, but she put face and legs to it. So, that's Christina right there. So.
What else do you want to know about Tony? Is this just a shy group?
Maybe I'm boring.
I wouldn't say it. So,
Claire.
oh, Claire, Patty, Claire.
I'm sorry.
I worked with a speaking coach for a very short period of time, and he told me that when we're doing these sorts of things, I should be talking the whole time they're running the microphone around, and I have not mastered that yet. So,
I believe in pause.
we'll just pretend like it's the silence. Claire.
Yes, it's not the silence. Okay. I've had this question for at least since we began. What's up for Tony next coming up?
Well, let's see. I just started compiling stuff for a book at the urging of some of my friends. And I'm also working on a TED Talk. I've got a coaching group that's helping me with that. And I'm not really sure. I'm enjoying being back here at Spiritual Life Center and reconnecting with all my friends. And
What subject matter?
pardon me?
The subject matter of your book.
Oh, it's called Inversion, and so it's basically it's kind of like I don't know if how many of you listen to my talk, but it's kind of along those lines of actually changing your perspective and seeing how that instead of you being in the world is in you. Instead of you being in a body, which is your body is in you. Spirit is too big to be housed in a physical form or a physical world. And all of that stuff is backed up by, psychology, quantum physics, and neurology, you name it. It's the beautiful time that we live in right now is that they're dancing the same dance. It's all come full empirical science, the empirical world, and the things that we've heard from sages for years. It's all saying the same thing. I mean, the Master Jesus, which could have been Buddha's brother, they're exactly the same. All the mythology that surrounds those two, it's just separated by 600 years.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting that, let's see, I've been in this over 45 years now, and it is so exciting to see that they're proving what we've been saying all along.
Yeah.
Yeah, and somebody told me the other day, she said, well, this is older than just like the Fillmores. Yeah, this is an ancient teaching. This is not new
yeah.
stuff that we teach.
Yeah, it goes back to Aristotle. I mean, on the Greek side, and then of course then the Fillmore actually, because of the context of when he introduced unity in the Midwest, it never would have taken roots if he hadn't used some of the antonyms of Christianity. Well, it's the ironic thing about it is we're as far removed from Christianity as we are from the moon. We're actually closer to Buddhism than anything. But Aristotle's metaphysical approach is also big. We use the 12 powers, which is, we borrow that from the Jews. And so, the thing about that, what Deborah said too, is that we can't just be satisfied with standing on the shoulders of giants. Michael told me one time, he says, unity's like a pool. He said, there's a shallow end and then there's a deep end. And he said, I was always in the deep end, underwater. But I've come up for air, and what I realize is that we really can't. We really can't. We have to build upon, we have to be brave. We have to be allowed to be used by Spirit. And we have to put forth, we talk about emerging wisdom. That's what we have to do. Each one of us can do that in our own way.
So how long have you been involved in the New Thought teachings, some religious science? How many?
Let's see. Without giving away my actual age.
Yes, just generally.
I'd say probably 40 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So have you noticed, and this is going to probably be our last, have you noticed how the way we teach it has changed over the last 40, 50 years? The language is changing.
The language is changing, yeah.
Yeah. I mean.
Yeah, unity in particular
Yeah.
is, I think that unity's one of those movements that never got credit for, because it never, wasn't what unity was about. Mm-hmm. Unity was about freely giving, since 1889, silent unity. And now it's become, I remember a time when people laughed at positive thinking. Now it's like a kitchen word. Everybody uses it at the dinner table. And they talk about, the New Age movement now that is a great misunderstanding of principles, but the intent is there, right? People are trying to move toward that. They may not completely understand what they're talking about, but the intent is there. And so people are accepting it. And so the Fillmore's dream of actually, blessing the world with this ancient truth is coming about. So.
Well, because the Fillmores were breaking new ground. I mean, Emma Kurz Hopkins, they were all, they used the word, if you read their materials, the word must is everywhere. You must do this and you must do that.
Yeah.
But they were starting at the beginning. This was new consciousness for people. Mm-hmm. And now we're trying to clear it up again and say.
Yeah. Yeah, the Fillmores were interesting. I mean, Charles was kidnapped as a child by an Indian tribe in Minnesota. And when he came back, he was a changed child. The medicine men did something to him. And then the other interesting artifact from him is that his uncle was president of the United States for like 2 years. Yeah, I was trying to remember his name. Millard, Millard Fillmore. Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting stuff that he changed, yeah.
Well, Tony, we could go on for another half hour, but we can't.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being willing to come
It
up
was
here
fun.
and do this.
Well,
It
thank
was funny.
you.
I tell people
Let's
it's going
have
to
a
be fun.
big hand for Deborah. She's so good at this. Isn't that right?
Tony.
Thank you.
And you can either stay up here or you can go sit during the offering, whichever you're comfortable doing, Tony.
Yeah.
So it is time for the love offering, and we know that it's just the way that we keep everything going, and the circulation and the give and the take, and it's what we do to keep our hearts and our wallets and our lives full. So let us do our offering blessing together. Divine love, as me, blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, and all that I circulate. Thank you, God.
Thank you, 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 thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Pouring down, your love is pouring down. Your love is pouring down. Your love is pouring down. Thank you. Thank you.
And I want to say thank you to all of you. The first week in April is the 4th anniversary of WOW, and it's because all of you keep coming back is why we're so successful. So thank you. Stand and get all connected. Are we ready? Let's take a deep breath. Let it go. Prayer for protection together. The light of God surrounds us.